I will post all these presentations probably in a Google Classroom, because I don't know whether you have access to any type of computer-assisted learning system related to the University of Canada. If there is something, because in the previous years there was no anything like that. If there's anything like that, I will post that on that particular platform, or else we can simply create a Google Classroom, and I can add all of you into that classroom and share these PowerPoints and all the assignments onto that area. During the next week, I will create that classroom and send you the invitation to join the class. Okay. And also I will post that PowerPoint presentation to that particular Google Classroom uh, page too. Okay, so part of this course, plant nutrient relationship and stress physiology, has been covered by Ms. Priyangi. I think she is still conducting some lectures. And basically, she is covering the plant nutrient relationship part, and I am the one who is going to cover the stress physiology part. Okay, so before we move into content, I would like to talk a little bit about the course contents. So in this plant physiology course, or plant stress physiology course, we are going to emphasize the principles of stress physiology, including the flood related stress, hypotoxic and anoxic soil, the type of stresses, and salinity related stress, drought related stress, temperatures, including low temperature and high temperature stress, and also pH extremes related to that, and water stress, water use efficiency, water availability and growth, and effect of radiation, that is mainly the light intensities, temperature on photosynthesis and other physiological functions in the plant. And this is the main learning outcome of the course. At the end of these lessons, you will be able to describe different plant responses to abiotic stressors. Okay. Okay. So before we talk about the stress physiology, let's first talk about what it is mean by plant physiology, or what is physiology. What is your idea about the physiology? What it is mean by plant physiology, or what it is mean by a physiological process or physiology? I want all of you to talk. Any idea? When we say yeah, that is one example for of physiological process. Okay, so what is actually physiological process? What is a physiology actually? If I say physiological process, that is like repetition of like same meaning. What is actually physiology? Okay, there are different fields in biology, related plant sciences. Okay, physiology, anatomy, biochemistry. Okay, likewise, systematics, ecology. Okay, so like all other examples, physiology is also a field of biology or field of plant sciences. And under physiology, what are the main aspects that, or what are we actually focusing on? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Okay. One, yeah. So that's yeah. So it's like in physiology, we are talking about different processes. Okay, they can be related to the survival of the plant, and also the growth of the plant, and also the development of the plant. Okay, so survival, growth, and development, there are various things needed for plants. And among all these conditions, or among all these things, there are certain processes which are very important for the survival and also growth, and also for the development of the plant and complete their life cycle, and also uh, they can maintain the continuity of the species or the generations. Okay, so those type of study of those type of processes are called we call plant physiology, or under plant physiology we study those type of processes. Okay, so give me some examples of plant physiological processes. Yeah, someone has said functional aspects. That is correct. Okay, functions of the plants. Okay, there are different functions. So what are the? Mhm. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, respiration. Okay, so that is a function. Mhm. Okay, water absorption and translocation of water. Okay, that is also a function. Yes. What else? Photosynthesis, yes. Chamika, photosynthesis, respiration, transpiration. Okay, they are also functions. And also we talk about the growth related physiological processes like cell division. Okay, that is also a physiological process. Growth and also development. Okay, so they are related to hormones, and also there are some growth movements or the movements of the plants. Okay, like uh, like some of them are like growth movements. Okay, uh, I think all of you have studied those different types of movements of the plants. Okay, so they are also something that we can discuss under plant physiology. Okay, so there are processes. All of them are processes, and we study those things under plant physiology. Okay. So, yeah, plant physiology is the study of plant function and behavior comprising of dynamic processes, growth, metabolism, and it include metabolism too, reproduction, defense, communication, and that account for plant being alive, okay, for the survival, growth, and the development. Okay, so when we talk about the plant physiological processes, we can discuss them or we can study them at different levels. So for an example, if you think about respiration, we can say the whole plant is respiring. Or we can talk about the photosynthesis of a particular species. Okay. And also we can talk about the photosynthetic process of a certain tissue. Okay, there are various photosynthetic tissues in the plant. Okay, there are organs like leaf. There are different tissues like palisade mesophyll cell layer. It's a tissue, and spongy mesophyll cell layer. That is a different tissue. And also, if you think about the guard cells in the epidermis, that is also a different tissue. So we can talk about that process at a certain level, tissue level, and also at the cellular level. Okay, so all the biochemical reactions are going on inside the cell. So for the respiration, for the photosynthesis, for the growth and development, okay, and also metabolism, okay, defense, communication, everything can be studied at cellular level, tissue level, and organ level, and also at the organism level too. And also, when we talk about this physiology, one of the very important aspect is that we have to keep in mind the structure and function association. Okay, so plant physiology has a very close association with the structure. So that is why we call anatomy and physiology. Okay, so for a certain particular physiological process, there are some structural adaptations in the plant cell, plant tissue, and also the plant organ. Okay, so usually the physiology is a very logical subject. Okay, it's not like anatomy or any other thing. So you don't have to like remember everything by heart. කටපාඩම් කරන්න අවශ්‍යතාවයක් නැහැ. If you can understand the structure and functional association, because this is very logical, okay, you can understand most of these physiological processes. And also, there is a very high link between the physiological processes and biochemistry. Okay, because certain things, certain biochemical reactions are going on inside the cell, and they result in a certain physiological function. So for an example, if you think about the photosynthesis, it's actually a biochemical process, but ultimate result is a physiological process. Respiration, the same thing. Okay, growth and development. In the growth, there will be synthesis of certain biochemicals, and then because of that, there will be a irreversible increase in size of the cell. Okay, that is what we call growth. Okay, likewise, it has a close association with structure, that is what we call anatomy, and the biochemistry. So in plant physiology, we will talk lot about the anatomical features and the biochemical or the reactions going on inside the cell. And then all these things together, anatomy and biochemistry together, we can understand this plant physiological process. Okay. Okay. So for these physiological processes, okay, here you can see some of the examples of the physiological processes like stomatal control, okay, transpiration here. And also you can see photosynthesis somewhere here, photorespiration, okay, assimilation. It can be nitrogen assimilation or carbon assimilation. If it is carbon assimilation, that is photosynthesis. Okay, nitrogen assimilation, that means nitrogen fixation. Okay, xylem flow. Okay, ion balancing. Okay, or ion uptake. All these are physiological processes. And you can see there are many abiotic factors interacting with those physiological processes. Here, inside these circles, you can see some of these abiotic factors like irradiance, temperature, water, salinity, nutrients, carbon dioxide. So all these are abiotic factors that affect the plant growth. And now you can see, so those abiotic factors are linked together by different physiological processes. Okay, so here you can see let's take one example, photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, even though it is a biochemical reaction, okay, there are certain abiotic factors which can determine the rate or whether the photosynthesis will take place or not. Like for an example, irradiance, that is a light level, and the carbon dioxide concentration, that is also a abiotic factor. Those two things are affecting. In addition to that, temperature and also nutrients, okay, those things, and also water level, everything can affect the photosynthesis process. If it is stomatal control, water level, amount of carbon dioxide, and also irradiance, everything can affect the stomatal control. If it is xylem flow, the amount of nutrients and water. Okay. Likewise, there are different abiotic factors affecting the plants, and uh, uh, these abiotic factors are linked to the plant by these physiological processes. Okay, so these abiotic factors play an important role for the plant survival, growth, development, as well as for the primary production. Okay, so here we are particularly interested in this their harvest or their primary production, because we depend on plants for our food. Okay, so what we actually harvest from the plant is their primary production. And if there's any effect on the primary production of the plant, especially the abiotic factors, so like 50% of the yield lost of the major crops is due to some abiotic stress-related factors or alterations of these abiotic factors in the environment. Okay, so they account for like 50% loss of harvest loss in most of the major crops in the world collectively. Okay, so that is very important to study how these factors affect on plants and also effect on the physiology of the plant especially. Okay, so that is what we are going to study in this course, different abiotic factors and how they affect the plants, especially the physiological processes. Okay, now let's move to the our subject of this course. So this course is plant stress physiology. Now let's talk about what is stress. So we know that we use that term for different aspects. So we sometimes we are under stress. Okay, so we know that under stress how we behave. Okay, what happens to us, and we know under certain conditions, plants, animals, everyone can be under stress. So if you think about the plant, okay, what is actually the stress? What is stress? If you have to define stress, you don't have, I don't want you to give the like 100% correct definition, but uh, what is actually stress? What do you think? From your own words, how do you define stress? Or let's say abiotic stress. Okay, let's confine to the term abiotic stress. If it is abiotic stress, what is that? Uncomfortable situation for the plant. Okay, yeah, yeah. So as science, as we are science students, okay, we believe that plants also can sense the things going on in the environment. So plants can be comfortable, they can become uncomfortable too. So if it is an uncomfortable, if they're in under uncomfortable situation, so we can call it a stress. Okay. So if you think about abiotic stress, okay, so how do you, any other definitions or any other explanation related to abiotic conditions? Abnormal conditions to the normal status of the plant. Okay, that is also one definition. Abnormal conditions. So abnormal conditions, those conditions can be found in the external environment. Okay, so there are something called normal conditions. Okay, so if there is a deviation from the normal condition, we can call it abnormal condition. Okay, to the normal status of the plant can be stressful. Okay, okay, so that is also a good definition. What else? I just want to refine the things that you say. Okay, any other idea? I got another response. Plants can't function as usual. Okay, there are some usual functions going on in the plant, and if they cannot function in the normal way, okay, plants can't function as usual under stressful conditions. That is also correct. That is negative impact. Okay. So, so what it is mean by a negative impact? So there are positive impacts. So if it is growing or if it is like thriving, if it is healthy, that is a positive impact. If it is like deteriorating, or if it is not growing, okay. So that is what we call negative impacts. Okay, good. Okay, that is also correct. Okay, so here I have mentioned some what we call definitions taken from some textbooks. Okay, so according to what the Buchanan, uh, uh, Buchanan, the definition is external. So you don't have to remember any of these things. Okay, I don't want you to uh, remember any of the definitions. You don't have to. Okay, what you have to do is you have to understand the content. Okay, and then write them in your own word. Okay, you don't have to remember. Okay, what has Bushnan or Smith it has said about stress physiology. Okay, It's not something that I'm going to ask. Therefore, don't have to uh, uh, remember any of these definitions by heart. Okay. So external condition that adversely affect the growth, development, or productivity of the plant. Okay, so it emphasizes an external condition. Okay, so the change is going on in the external condition that adversely affect the development or productivity of the plant. That is the first definition. The second one is stressful environments, which are the definition talks about the stressful environments, which are environments that are less than optimal for plant growth. Okay, so they have defined the stress as related to the environment, stress environment, okay, or the environments that are less than optimal for plant growth. Okay, so someone already told about the optimum plant growth, and if the environment is supporting less than that optimal condition, then that will be a stressful condition for the plant. The third one, according to Tays and Seeker, this is one of the textbooks that we use for plant physiology, a disadvantageous influence exerted on the plant by external abiotic or biotic factors. Again, it talks about the external biotic or abiotic factors. Okay, so you can see one thing common in all these three definitions. They are talking about something going on externally to the plant. Okay, so abiotic stress is related to the external changes in the plant. Okay, so externally there are different changes in the environment. So water level can change, temperature can change, and the soil nutrients can change. So those are the stressful conditions. So those are the stressors according to these definitions. Okay, so these definitions are mainly focused on environmental factors as cause of the stress. Okay, so environment factor itself is a stress condition, stressor. Okay, and also the agronomic perspectives of the trees. Okay, so talk about the optimum growth. Okay, development and productivity. Okay, and also disadvantages influence, advantages, disadvantages influence. So they are like agronomic perspectives. Okay, so we don't know whether they are advantages or disadvantages for plants. So we think that they are disadvantages if they produce like small amount of seeds, or if they produce the harvest is low. Okay, so we think it is disadvantages because it is disadvantages for us, but we don't know how plants think. අපි දන්නනේ plant එක කොහොමද හිතන්නේ කියලා. හරි. So for an example, if you think about, okay, let's take one common example. Some people would like to have kids, and some people they don't want to have kids. That's their choice. But if we are looking at them from our point of view, we may come to a conclusion because they are suffering or they are not happy. But we don't know whether they are happy or not. So likewise, so disadvantages or stress, everything is from our view. We think they are in the stressful environment, but we actually don't know whether they are in the stressful environment or not. So I think you got my point. I will explain another thing because I want to give you one important aspect of this abiotic stressors. That is why I am talking all these things. Okay, so agronomic perspective, that is related to the productivity and also the environmental factors. Okay, something externally going on, and they are causing this dangerous or the stressful conditions in the plant. So that is what all these three definitions say. Okay, now in this graph you can see a particular uh, uh, like factor, abiotic factor, and how it fluctuates naturally in the environment over the time. Okay, so for an example, let's think these are the graph in blue color. These are some diurnal changes, like during the daytime and during the nighttime. Every day there are some fluctuations. For an example, let's talk about light intensity. So light intensity is high towards noon, and then it drops down, okay, during the night, and then come back. Okay, likewise daily fluctuations. And also temperature, there will be daily fluctuations up and down. Every day there will be something like that. And sometimes there can be like humidity. It can also have some daily fluctuations like that. On top of that, there are some seasonal fluctuations, in especially in the temperate countries. Temperature can fluctuate like this seasonally in the red color. Okay, so there are some fluctuations. Okay, they fluctuate regularly and also predictable way under daily or seasonal cycles. Okay, so every change in the environment. Okay, so we say there's an optimal condition. Okay, there was one definition. There was an optimal condition, and a deviation from that optimal condition will be stressful for the plant. So do we actually think those type of diurnal changes, small changes, will be stressful for plants? What do you think? Yes or no? So do you think yes? I mean the daily fluctuations. උදේට එළිය වැටෙනවා ලයිට් ලෙවල් එක අඩු වෙනවා වැඩි වෙනවා වැඩි වෙනවා. ටෙම්පරේචර් එක දවල්ට වැඩි වෙනවා රැට අඩු වෙනවා දවල්ට වැඩි වෙනවා රැට අඩු වෙනවා. හැමදාම මේක වෙනවා. Okay, will that be a stressful condition for plants?
Yes.
Okay, probably no. Okay, therefore, so we have to think back about our definitions, some of our definitions, how we think about the stressful condition. So not all the changes that going on in the plant or going on in the environment will be stressful. There is a like optimum condition, and not all the fluctuations above or below the optimal condition, those won't be stressful conditions. Okay, and also this is another example. Treatment with the chilling temperature of 10 degrees centigrade causes a rapid decrease in photosynthetic rate of tropical species, but has only minor effects on temperate species. Okay, so there are freezing temperatures, like below zero is freezing, what we call, and chilling temperatures. Chilling temperatures, chilling 10 degrees centigrade. Okay, so if you expose a tropical plant species for a chilling temperature like 10 degrees centigrade, that will decrease the photosynthesis rate of the tropical species. But it has only minor effect on temperate species because they are used to thrive under that chilling temperatures. Okay, we know that during the spring season and the fall season, the average temperature will be like 10 degrees centigrade in most of the temperate countries. So the plants will still be surviving. Okay, they will grow and they will develop under that temperature. Okay, so that if they are like growing and developing, it's not like negative impact, it is like a positive thing. Okay, so it is not going to be a stressful condition for temperate plants. But if you expose a tropical species for 10 degrees centigrade, then that will rapidly decrease the photosynthetic rate. The same photosynthetic reaction will be upregulated, or nothing will happen to one particular set of species. So, and the response will be completely different in another set of different species, tropical species. So it is species dependent. The response will be not related to what is actually going on in the environment, it is actually the response related to the particular species. Okay. And also, so is the temperature of 10 degrees centigrade. So that is the environmental factor. Okay, 10 degrees of temperature, Celsius of temperature is the environmental factor. Is that factor stressful? Okay, we are talking about the environment factor. So we cannot conclude whether it is stressful or not without taking into consideration of the species, because it depends on the species. Okay, and also you may have heard about metallophytes or halophytes. So metallophytes, what are the metallophytes? Metallophytes are the plants which can tolerate and which can grow in what? Metal ion contaminated environments. Some are what we call there are different deposits. Okay, metal deposits. For an example, in Sri Lanka, where you can find metallophytes in Sri Lanka. අපේ වගේ metal, naturally metal concentration එක ගොඩක් වැඩි අපේ තියෙන ecosystems මොකක්ද? Can anyone name where we can find a lot of metallophytes? Have you heard about Usangoda? Okay, Usangoda. So that is an area in down south, and in that area you can find like the soil is brown in color because there's high concentration of ferrous, ferric, and other metals. And there you can find a completely different vegetation that you cannot find elsewhere in the island. වෙන කොහෙවත් නැති විදිහේ plants වර්ගයක් ඒක තියෙනවා, because those plants are adapted to live in that conditions. So maybe that is not very familiar for you, but halophytes. What are halophytes? They are salt tolerating plants. You know that in the coastal ecosystems and also in our semi-arid zone, Kalpiti, ඒ වගේ පැතිවල, there are what we can find some plants called halophytes. They are adapted to live in like salt contaminated soil. Saliconia, ඒ වගේ ඒවා තියෙන ලුණුවිල in Sinhala we call, and there are like a lot of species which can grow in shoreline, shore area. Okay, ඒ වගේ තැන්වල තියෙන plants තියෙනවා. And they grow and they reproduce well, and they are in a extremely high I mean they are growing in the soil with extremely high conditions of maybe what we call heavy metals and also salts. Do you think that those plants are under stress? What do you think? Yes or no?
No.
Probably no. Okay, they can grow well. Even so, we call them, okay, they are growing in high salt concentration, and they are in growing in soils contaminated with what we call heavy metals, but they grow happily. So here you can find two plants. You can find two plants in the same soil. One plant is growing happily, other plant is wilted. The same environment, very close proximity to each other. So now you can see the stress is plant dependent response. Okay, and also that means species dependent. Depending on the species, you can see there's one species in the behind, one species on the front. The front one is wilted, the other one is growing well. So the abiotic stress is a plant dependent or species dependent response. And also it is dose dependent response. So whether a condition is stressful or not is not determined by the environment or the magnitude in the environment, but how the plants respond to that. Okay. So actual impact of the abiotic condition or the change in abiotic condition on specific organism has to be considered. Okay, it's not actually the magnitude in the in the environment. So always we have to describe the stressful condition in relation to the plant species that we are interested in. දෙකන temperature එක centigrade අංශක 10කින් වැඩි වුණා කියන එක. So if the temperature is increased by 10 degrees centigrade, that increment of 10 degrees centigrade is not the thing that we have to discuss under the abiotic stress, but we have to first think about what is the plant that we are interested in, what is going on in the plant. Okay, so actual impact of the abiotic condition or the change in the abiotic condition of the specific organism need to be considered when you have to define the abiotic stress. So something like this can be a very good definition for the abiotic stress according to Larcher 1980, referred to stress as changes in physiology that occur when species are exposed to extraordinary unfavorable conditions. Okay, so stressful condition or stress is actually the change in the physiology of the plant. Okay, so here you can see the physiology of the plant has been altered because it has been exposed to extraordinary unfavorable condition going on in the environment. So with all these things, okay, the stress show up when a certain threshold of a stressor, which can no longer compensated by plants, is exceeded. Okay, so the relative position of the stress tolerance should depend on. So when when if you are supposed to determine whether a plant is stressed or not, so we have to keep in mind it depends on the plant species and it depends on the type of stressor that apply, and also the growth condition and the vitality before the stressor starts to act. Okay, so it's not actually the magnitude in the plant, in the environment. So there are some plants, they are growing on a stressful, we think that is stressful for a long period of time. Let's take one example, like a plant growing on a rock outcrop. The plants growing on rock outcrops. Okay, there's very limited amount of light, soil, therefore very limited amount of water, and sometimes there will be a lot of sunlight, and also wind velocity is very high. Okay, so they restrict their growth, but they anyway they grow, survive, and they reproduce. Okay, so you cannot compare that plant with the same species which is growing in normal condition. Normal mean optimum condition. Okay, so you have to think about the present growing condition of the plant. Okay, to determine whether the new condition is stressful or not. Once you compare those two, then you can get an idea whether the new condition is stressful condition or not. Okay, so now there are two things that we have to we have learned. One is called stressor, the other one is called stress. Okay, so the causal environmental factor responsible for plant stress is called stressor or stress factor or external constraint. Okay, they are external things that is going on in the environment. So that is not the stress, that is the stressor or the causative agent of the stress in the plant. The result of exposure to the stressor is what we call stress response or stress. So stress is something going on inside the plant, that is a physiological change in the plant, that is what we call stress. Okay, so this stress can be discussed at molecular level, cellular level, tissue or organismal level related to the plant physiology. Okay. Any questions so far? Is it clear what it is mean by stress?
Clear, sir.
Is there anything that you want me to explain again? No? Okay. I guess all of you are comfortable with that. And if you have any question, you can, if you want, you can interrupt me during the lecture, or you can ask later. Okay? Okay. Now let's talk what are the plant responses to abiotic stressors. Okay, so plants are living organisms. So when there is any change going on in the environment, they have to respond there. Okay, they have to maintain their optimum conditions. Okay, homeostasis has to be maintained, like plants, like animals. Okay, all the living organisms. One of the properties of all living organisms is homeostasis. That is, keeping their internal environment uh, uh, independently independent from the external changes in the environment. Internal environment එකේ තියෙන ඒවා constant විදිහට තියාගන්න ඕනේ external fluctuations එක්ක වෙනස් වෙන්න දෙන්නේ නැතුව. Okay, so they have to respond to the abiotic stressors. Okay, so animals, if there's any abiotic any stress conditions going on in the environment, they can move away from that particular area, and they can go to a comfortable place and they can avoid that. But plants, they cannot do that. Okay, so they have to face to the abiotic stress conditions. Okay, so there are certain responses to abiotic stresses going on in the environment shown by plants. Okay, so those responses uh, can depend on the severity, okay, the magnitude of the stress condition, or the magnitude of the stressor, and duration, how long that particular stressful condition is available, or how long that plant has been facing to the stress condition, that is a duration, and rate. Okay, so duration and rate, they are different. Okay, so rate means at a given period of time, how much stressful conditions. Okay, can magnitude එකෙන් බලුවාම කොච්චර ප්‍රමාණයක් වෙනවද? For an example, if you think about light. Okay, light is important for the plant for the photosynthesis, and if there is high amount of light, that will be a stressful condition for them too. Okay, so light contains photons. Okay, so every light ray that reaches to plant contains some photons. Okay, so what it is mean by rate? How many photons hit on the leaf or that particular individual in a given period of time. So if there is high magnitude of light, or light intensity is high, the rate can be high. And also, if the rate can be high by can be increased by decreasing the time period. High amount of light during a short period of light. Okay, that will also increase the rate. So both are important: severity, duration, and the rate. And also stresses, because the one interesting thing about these stresses is usually one stress will lead to another stress. Okay, they usually don't act as a single stressor. For an example, if you think about the light, okay, when light intensity is increased, the temperature will also increase because it contains photons, that is energy. Okay, and also if you think about the salinity, when salinity is increased, okay, so the direct effect will be like the iron toxicity, and also it will reduce the water availability. Okay, so the salt stress plus water stress, both will be there. So you have to think about that too. Okay, or the plants will think about that too, how plants respond to those abiotic conditions. Okay, and also the plant's responses can be elicited directly by stress, or maybe through the indirectly, like induced injuries. So there are some direct effects and indirect effects of the stress factor. Okay, so because of the direct factor, direct in things and also indirect things, you can see some changes in the plant. So if I give another example, for an example, um, water. Okay, when there is a drought, the osmolarity of the plant or the tissues will be altered. Okay, so uh, osmolarity related things like the shrinkage of the cell, those are primary effects on the plant cell. And also that can damage photosynthetic membranes. Okay. වතුර අඩු වෙනකොට photosynthetic membrane එක damage වෙනකොට we will talk about that later. And then that will impact on the harvest or the productivity of the plant, or the photosynthesis and respiration also can be changed, okay, at the cellular level. So it is, they are not direct effects, they are indirect effects. Okay. And also when plants are responding, their genotype, their developmental stages, like whether it is a seedling, sapling, or a mature plant, and also the species or the organ or tissue, what type of it is, whether it is a very soft tissue or a hard tissue, and then everything will determine whether the plant or the tissue will be sensitive or resistant for that plant stress conditions. Okay, so that is how plant respond. So there are various ways of responding plants to the abiotic stress conditions. Okay, so let's talk about different types of plant responses. Plants can respond to abiotic stresses by having some resistant mechanisms. So especially we can talk them under individual level. All plant will show some type of resistant mechanism. Okay, so they can develop unique mechanism to combat the varied stress conditions. There are three different types of resistant mechanisms that we can discuss. So this is like a general introduction. So under each and every what we call a stress condition, we will talk about what are those resistant mechanisms. So the first one, A, is stress avoidance. Okay, so stress avoidance. The second one is stress tolerance. The third one is stress escapance. Okay, all these three words, I mean ABC, stress avoidance, tolerance, stress escapance, may sound similar to you, but actually they have three different meanings: avoidance, tolerance, and escapance. Okay, what is avoiding? So what is avoiding? Avoidance mechanisms are mechanisms prevent exposure to stress. Okay, so let's talk about that first. So we know that plants are sedentary. They cannot move. Okay, so they are attached to the substrate, that is soil. So plants cannot move. Okay, so this is a plant. And let's assume there's a stressful condition going on in the environment, maybe high amount of sunlight. Okay, or the temperature. So stress avoidance means mechanisms prevent to exposure of the stress. So here the plants, there are different physiological and biochemical processes going on in the plant. So we know that any change in the physiology and biochemistry in the plant will cause the stress. Okay, will cause the stress. So if there is a mechanism that prevent the exposure, okay, so sun is there, environmental changes are going on, we cannot change that. Okay, but if there is a way, if there is a mechanism that prevent the exposure to that stress, so that means the condition is still there, but plant will not feel that. Okay, that type of mechanisms are called stress avoidant mechanisms. Okay, they are called stress avoidant mechanism. Plants won't feel that stress at all. So that is what we call stress avoidance. I will explain B and then you can understand the difference. The second one is stress tolerance. Stress resistant mechanism is there. So what is a stress resist tolerance or resistant mechanism? So plants will exposed to the stress conditions. Okay. And there are certain things, alterations going on inside the plant because of the exposure. And then as a result of these different things going on, they can be physiological changes or biochemical changes in the plant, they can withstand the stress. Stress condition is there, they are feeling the stress, but they can build up some tolerance. Tolerance එකක් වෙන්න නම් ඒකට expose වෙන්න ඕනනේ. Without exposing, you cannot be tolerant to anything. So like you, the plants also, they will experience they can feel the stress, but they develop some mechanisms to permit to plants to withstand that stress. It's the same thing going on in the cell because of the alterations going on in the cell because of the changes in the environment, but plants will not become harmed or get damaged because they can have some mechanisms to prevent that. Third one, C, stress escapance. Some plants, they can complete their life cycle before the onset of the stress. There are some predictable stress conditions. Okay, especially if you think about the temperate countries, temperature changes can be predictable. Okay, I am not talking about like small changes. I'm talking about the seasonal changes. So we know that, okay, towards the October, the late October, or depending on the latitude actually, okay, towards the end of the, if it is like in the northern hemisphere country, towards the end of the year, there will be a winter season. Okay, and then towards May, June, there will be a summer season. Okay, so likewise, there will be some predictable changes in the environment. And also here in our countries, like tropical countries, we have rainy seasons and drought seasons. We know that during February, March, we have a relative drought period even in the wet zone. Okay, so they are like predictable changes, and the plants or the species, okay, in the course of evolution, they have adapted to that. Okay, so they know, okay, in another 5 months or 10 months, there will be a drought period. Okay, that is how the nature works. And then they complete their life cycle before the onset of that stress. And then there won't be a plant when there is a drought period. Okay, so that is what we call stress escapance. Okay, now if you have understood what is stress avoidance, stress tolerance, and stress escapance, can you give me some examples? Stress avoidance. Stress avoidance එකට example එකක් දෙන්න. Mechanisms prevent exposure to the stress. Just give me one example, then I just sorry. Greenhouse, no, I'm talking about not the mechanisms preventing exposure. I am talking about the mechanisms in the plant. Okay, it's not something that we do. Okay, there are plants, we call them stress avoidance plants. Okay, maybe මම කියන්නේ අපි හදපු structure එකකින් avoid කරනවා නෙමෙයි. Plants also have something like that. Let's say in the chat. In mangroves, viviparous germination. Okay, yeah, so viviparous germination, it can be considered as a stress avoidance because we know that the what is viviparity? The seeds will germinate attached to the mother plant. We know that once the seed is dispersed, they will fall onto the what we call lagoon. Okay, and water is not the water is hard. It's not very salty, and it will discourage the seed germination. So what will happen? The seed will germinate attached to the mother plant. So it is a mechanism that prevent the exposure to the stress. Another example, uh, can you give me another simple example? Plants having trichomes, waxy tissues. Okay, very good. Okay, plants having waxy tissues. So sunlight is there, okay, and plant cells are there. In between the plant cells and the sunlight, there will be a waxy tissue. So in order to reach the sunlight to the cells where all these biochemical reactions and physiological processes going on, they have to pass through the waxy cuticles. But what will happen when they reach the waxy cuticle? They will be reflected. They get reflected by the waxy tissue. Okay, then what will happen? That is a mechanism that prevent the exposure to the stress. Okay, so and also having trichomes. Trichomes කියන කෙනුත් ඒ වගේම දෙයක් වෙනවා. Okay, so that is what we call, those type of things are called stress avoidance mechanisms. Okay, stress is already there, but the cell or the plant will not get exposed to the stress. Stress tolerance mechanism. Can somebody tell me a stress tolerance mechanism?
Actually, the season trees hold down their leaves.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it clearly.
At the winter seasons,
Mhm.
some plants fall down their leaves, and
Uh-huh. Yeah.
after the
Okay, very good. Okay, stress tolerance condition is like during the winter season or the fall season, some plants before the during the what we call, yeah, closer to the winter, they shed their leaves. Okay, so they feel that there is something going on in the environment, and to resist that, okay, and they can withstand the stress by reducing the evaporation, and they can conserve some water by shedding their leaves. Okay, so that is a stress tolerance mechanism. They can tolerate the stress. So it doesn't help them to avoid the stress, but the stress will be there and it will experience the stress, but no harm will happen to the plant because they can resist now by developing that resistance. Okay, so it happens after the exposure to the stressful condition. එහෙම නැත්නම් ඒක predictable විදිහට එනවා කියලා දැනුණාට පස්සේ තමයි ඒක සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ. Okay, so it can be genetically determined. Okay, there, so we will talk about the pathways. Okay, then you can understand how they can detect the signals from the environment to uh, uh, to respond like that. Okay, so that is a stress tolerant mechanism. So we know that. Another one good example is when some plants are exposed to maybe let's assume high light conditions. Okay, we see the development of some pigments. හරි, අපි දකින සමහර plants වලට අර අවුවේ තිබ්බහම පොඩක් රතු පාට වෙනවා because of the production of anthocyanin. We know that anthocyanin is a stress related chemical, so plants can tolerate stress by producing anthocyanin pigments. There are different functions of these anthocyanin pigments, so that is a stress tolerance mechanism, not any stress avoidance mechanism. So because of the production of anthocyanin, plants can withstand the stress. Okay, there will be a lot of other examples we will talk about. We will talk them later. Stomatal movement according to the environmental conditions affecting photosynthesis and respiration. Very good. Okay, Senaratna. So stomatal movement. So we know that when the environment is getting warmer and maybe when the amount of water is depleting in the soil, as a resistant mechanism, what will happen? They close their stomata and conserve water. Okay, so that is a mechanism that permit plants to withstand stress. Okay, so they are not like closed every time, but when they are exposed to that condition, they will close the stomata because that will permit the plant to withstand the stress. Okay, see, stress escapance. Complete the life cycle before the onset of the stress. Can you give me one example from the plants that you see around? අපි දකිනවා නිකන් අපේ ගෙවල් වල තියෙන ගස්සොත් සමහර ඒවා තියෙනවා stress escapers. Stress escaping. Complete their life cycle before the onset of the stress.
Some grasses are die in the drought season, and their wood parts are alive until the end of the drought season. After that, they will live again.
Yeah, can you give me one example for such a plant? So usually those type of plants, they have dormant structures.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if the plant is gone, then we cannot talk about the tolerance. No? So what type of plant? Yeah, plants having dormancy period in their life cycle. Yes, very good. Annual plants, perennial plants. Is that, yeah, annual plants, perennial plants. Yeah, most of them are annual plants actually. Yes, Lahiru. Can you give me one example? We have nice examples in our country. Lotus. Yes, maybe lotus. I am not very aware of lotus. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So usually they have to have a like underground like combs or rhizomes like structure. So we know that lotus also have, and one good example is turmeric. Okay, and also ginger. Those plants we know that like towards අපි කියන්නේ කොහොමද අපි කියන්නේ so we know that in our traditional the indigenous knowledge, we have heard that we have to harvest the turmeric plants or turmeric roots during like January and February when the leaves are turning yellow. Okay, because they're annual plants, they complete their life cycle by January, and the plant, the above ground plant will be dead and the rhizome will be there. So we know that rhizome is a hard structure, it's a dormant structure. Without water, it can survive for a long period of time. And when the conditions are good, they can sprout again and start another cycle. Okay, so those plants with like we call them geophytes. Okay, geophytes kine batamai geo kila kene ground ne. So geophytes, they are those plants produce those type of underground structures, rhizomes and combs, and they can tolerate the drought conditions. And the above ground part will be dead, and the below ground part will survive during the drought season, and then during the rainy season they will sprout again. And also there are some plants like wind annuals, we call in temperate countries, there are wind annuals. So those wind annuals, they complete their life cycle. So they usually, the seeds will germinate in the spring, sorry, in the fall season. Fall season කියලා කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් fall කියලා කියන්නේ autumn වලට, autumn and fall, they're similar. In like October, November, yeah, September, October, during those months. And then they can, the seedlings can remain dormant in the winter because the temperature is not good. And then during the spring, they grow well and they produce flowers and they set seeds. And then the whole plant will die, but seeds will be dispersed. And then during the summer period, when there's extremely high temperature, the seeds will not get affected by high temperatures, because seeds also are dormant structures depending on the seed type again. Okay, some seeds can be dried up to like 5% water content without harming the or without changing the viability. So they are dormant structures and they can complete the life cycle again. Okay, so those type of plants are called stress escapance plants. Okay, so that is also a mechanism. Okay, so these are three different types of mechanisms that can show by plants in response to abiotic stress. Okay, okay. Then what is the second mechanism or a second way of abiotic stress? So the second way is by physiological adjustment. Plants can do different physiological adjustments and then respond to the abiotic stress. Okay, here you can see in this picture. So I will post this we called presentation. And if there is anything that you don't see in the diagrams or in my presentation, you better take down notes. Okay, because I will post the original this particular presentation and without any other thing. Okay, if you see anything that you have to take notes, please do that because there won't be another version of the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so physiological adjustment. So here in this diagram, you can see some main physiological processes. Okay, so biosynthesis and growth, that is biosynthesis means photosynthesis and growth process. Okay, these are physiological processes. Reproduction, there are some physiological processes associated with reproduction. And storage, okay, like translocation of food and storing, they are physiological processes. Transport, water and nutrients, uptake and transportation, they are also physiological processes. So these are physiological processes. You can see there are some physiological processes in the plant. And we know that all these physiological processes need energy. Okay, at least a part of those physiological processes. සමහර process තියෙනවා උදාහරණයක් විදිහට water uptake cellular energy ඕනේ නැහැ, but there are certain water uptake processes require energy. Okay, so everything needs energy. So energy coming from the synthesis by synthesizing the food. Again, the biosynthetic process from the with the help of sunlight. Okay, so there are physiological processes like that. And also the plants have its own growth and development program. So plants know when they want to absorb water, when they want to synthesize food, when they have to grow, when they have to reproduce, when they have to store their food. Okay, so plants have those requirements and plants know when to do that. Okay, it is determined by, okay, partially determined by the genetic makeup. Plants genes will determine when to grow, when to reproduce, okay, when and where to store, okay, when and where, how you have to absorb water, when and how you have to uptake nutrients. So there should be transporters, there should be different other mechanisms. So there are proteins involved in that, there are enzymes involved in that, carrier proteins, channel proteins are involved in that. So they have to be synthesized, proteins have to be synthesized. So all the information is in the DNA. So that is the DNA and developmental program. So partially it is determined by the genetic makeup of the plant. But it is not purely genetic makeup. Plants always have to check with the environment. They have to monitor the environmental conditions and then adjust those conditions. For an example, if the temperature is good and if the water is available in the environment, then plants have to uptake water. Okay, if the sun is there, then they have to do the photosynthesis. In the night, there is no point of like activating all these enzymes and doing the photosynthesis. So environment has to be monitored. Okay, so in for the reproduction also they have to monitor that. For the storage, they have to monitor the environmental condition, and then environmental condition and developmental program has to talk with each other. Okay, there should be some communication between those two, and then so they have to monitor and response. So they have to give that signal to the DNA, and then it will initiate the synthesizing of those proteins, and then adjust those physiological functions. Okay, so if there's an environmental component, like here you can see environmental monitoring and response. So if the environmental conditions are fluctuating, or if there are some stress conditions going on, then plants have to adjust their physiology. Okay, so it's not like hard and fast goal. You have to do this at this particular given at this point. Okay, but plants have to have the freedom, and also they can adjust those physiological mechanisms. So I will give you one example. Okay, so we know that plants will do photosynthesis, they do their biosynthetic processes, and some of the synthetic processes they can use them for their own growth, and some of the biosynthetic material can be stored, and then some of the biosynthetic material can be allocated for their reproduction. Okay, we know that if there are like seeds and flowers are producing by the plant, then lot of energy will be utilized for that reproduction process. So let's assume the environmental condition, it's an annual plant එකක් තියෙනවා. So it's very close to complete its life cycle. හරි තව මාසෙකින් විතර එයාගේ ජීවිතය ඉවර වෙනවා කියලා හිතන්නකෝ. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ඒ කාලෙන් ඉවර වෙන්න ඕන. It will be die in another 2-3 months. Let's assume that. So now environmental condition is getting bad, getting worse. Okay, so water is depleting now. So now it will affect. So environmental monitoring is there, now developmental program is there. So this energy and everything has to be allocated, partitioned in between all these processes for storage, reproduction, biosynthesis, transportation, and everything. If there's no any stress conditions, then what plants will think? Okay, plants will think, okay, I have to survive another 3 months. Therefore, I will allocate most of my energy for the biosynthesis and growth, because I have to live another 3 months. Okay, then after that, maybe in another month, I will allocate my energy for the reproduction, because that is the right time for the reproduction. Okay, and then I will store some energy now for the reproduction. But now, with the onset of that drought period, now plants, their genes, and the plants will feel that I will not going to live another 3 months. So what will plant decide? I will complete my life cycle very soon and I will die. Okay, so that is the ultimate goal of the plant, of the species. අපි ඔය ගෙවල් හදන ඒවා ළමයින්ට ඉතුරු කරන හැම එකම හිතන්නේ. නමුත් plants එහෙම හිතන්නේ නැහැ. අනිත් animals අතරින් හිතන්නේ. තමන්ගේ so what is the most important thing of a living organism is the continuity of the species. reproduce so that is the main goal of the species, an individual living organism. So what will they do? They will reduce their biosynthesis, they will reduce their storage, they will allocate most of their energy for the reproduction, because now that is their goal. So they will reproduce faster, and before they die, they will make flowers, they will make fruits, and then die. Now you can see there are some physiological adjustments, okay, in the plant, depending on the environmental conditions going on. So those type of, that is another way that plants can respond. Okay, they can do different adjustments in their physiological processes, and then they can respond in that way. So by adjusting, so as a result of that, we can see the decline of crop or the yield. So for an example, if it is a potato plant, and if we are depending on the potato tubers, then what will happen? The plant will allocate more energy for the what we call let's assume that is sexual reproduction, okay, to make flowers and seeds, and then this one, so you won't see much of potato tubers, okay. So and if it is like, if you depend on leaves of a plant, if that is the crop, then they won't allocate for the leaf production, that is vegetative growth. They will allocate more for the production of flowers and seeds, but we don't consume them. So that will be a yield loss or crop loss for us. Okay, so that is what we call physiological adjustment. So in this one, the resistant mechanisms, they are they can be described at individual level. Plant will be avoiding stress. Plant will tolerate. Plant will escape from the drought. Likewise, and the physiological adjustment, they can be discussed at tissue level or the organ level. There are reproducing tissues, reproducing organs. Okay, likewise. Okay, so we can see physiological adjustment at the organ level or tissue level. And third mechanism is alteration in gene expression pattern. That is at the cellular level. Okay, that is something that we can see at the cellular level. So these plants can change their genetic responses or genetic expressions as a response to abiotic stress factors. Okay, so these abiotic stresses can include modification in development and metabolism in plants by changing their gene expression pattern. Okay, so what actually they do, so when the stress is detected, okay, there will be different things going on in the plant cell. So one of these things can act as a factor that can inform the plant cells that there is a stress event going on in the cell. Okay, it can be sensed, and then that signal can be transferred using a signal transduction pathway. Okay, and then ultimately that signal will give to the nucleus. That is where we can find the genome. And then as a response to that stress condition, certain proteins and enzymes and different other biochemicals can be synthesized. Okay, and those chemicals, they can modulate the growth, development, and reproduction of the cell, if cell, and ultimately the plant. Okay, so that is more towards a tolerance. And sometimes plants can die because plants can decide whether they will survive and tolerate this particular uh, 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 stressful event, or whether it is better to die. Okay, sometimes plants take the decision to die. අපි කියන්නේ necrosis, necrobiosis කියලා දෙකක් තියෙනවානේ. There are two ways of cellular death. Okay, one is necrosis, the other one is necrobiosis. In one case, it is like developmental really controlled cell death, programmed cell death කියලා කියන්නේ. Okay, so under the programmed cell death, okay, plant cell or the cell decide to die, and then like in a methodical way, they follow a particular pathway, and then disintegrate all the cellular organelles and everything, and then ultimately cell will die. Okay, that is what we call necrosis. Okay, so plant will decide to die because it is effective, cost effective to die than survival. Survive වෙන්න ගොඩක් දේවල් අපි දන්නනේ. So sometimes our people decide to suicide because they come to a conclusion that rather than stress that they have to face while they are living, it's better to die. Okay, energetically and economically, it is more, beneficial. Okay, so plants also will think like that. Okay, rather than surviving, because they have to invest a lot of energy and also they have to produce a lot of other chemicals, maybe secondary metabolites, proteins and enzymes to tolerate that stress conditions. So it will consume a lot of energy. Okay, so rather than consuming that energy, it is better to die. Okay, so all these decisions will be taken by different gene expression patterns going on in the cell. Okay, so on the cellular level, plants can alter their gene expression patterns and then they can adjust or they can decide to die. Okay, so that is the third way of plant response to abiotic stress. So those are the three different ways of responding to abiotic stress factors. Okay, shall we take like it's 3:27. I will not going to take like until 5 o'clock. Probably like 4 or 4:15. I will finish the lecture. So shall we take like a 5 minutes break and come back? Anything which is not very clear? No. Okay with everything. Okay. Okay. So now we are going to talk about what actually happens during this stress. Okay. Uh, so before that, let's talk about this statement. The outcome of a stress event is always a negative effect. What is your idea? Yes or no? If it is yes, why is that? If it is no, why is that? What is your idea? What do you think? Will the outcome of a stress always a negative effect? Let's talk about the plant from from plant's perspectives. Okay, will that be a negative effect? Hmm. Positive. Okay, so why do you think it is positive? Uh-huh. Okay, yeah, sometimes it can prevent the plant what? Can you complete? Uh-huh. Yeah, plants can develop. Plants, yeah, go ahead. Uh-huh. Yeah, so plants can develop certain like methods, or they can develop certain structures that can helpful for the plant. Okay, so for an example, let's assume, so as a response to a drought, if the plant can produce a lot of roots, okay, so they can, those roots can go all the way down to the water table, and then they can acquire more water. Okay, so that will helpful for the plant, no matter whether there is a drought event in future or not. Okay, so it is not a negative, always a negative effect. There can be positive effects too. Okay, so you are correct. Okay, sometimes they can tolerate, they can develop tolerance mechanisms, and those tolerance mechanisms can be there for a longer period of time, and that can avoid the exposure of the plant for the upcoming stressful conditions. දැනට ඩිවලොප් කරගත්ත දේවල් නිසා ඒගොල්ලන්ට තව දෙයක් ඉස්සරහට එන්න තියෙන ස්ට්‍රෙස් වලින් ඒගොල්ලන්ට ඒක නැති වෙන්නත් එන එක නවතින්නත් පුළුවන්. So on the other hand, okay, on top of that, some of the aspects that they can develop can be helpful uh, 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 to prevent the exposure of a different uh, um, uh, stress condition. හරි දැන් එයා දැනට expose වෙනවා එක stress condition එකකට. So as a result of the of exposing for a particular stressful condition, they develop some mechanisms, and those mechanisms will helpful for them for a different to fight with a different stressful condition. හරි සමහර ඒවා තියෙනවානේ සමහර mechanisms තියෙනවා ඒක එකකට විතරක් නෙමෙයි කීපයකට හරියන්න පුළුවන්. හරි so for an example like let's take this is not 100% correct example. The trichomes will be effective for the water conservation as well as to prevent the exposure of high sunlight. So if you think that the plant, a particular plant develop trichomes, I'm talking about just as example, it's not 100% correct. They develop trichomes after exposure into to high sunlight. Okay, and then in the next month they are exposing to a drought condition, but still that the first developed mechanisms will be helpful for them. Therefore, we cannot say that the outcome of a stress event is always negative effect. There can be some positive effects too. Okay, so that is, your answer is correct. Okay, so we can talk about that with those type of examples, and also we will talk about how plants respond to the stress, what happens during the stress, and then we can find another answer, an example for supporting this statement by studying that too. Okay, what happens during the stress? Okay, so there are two different types of stressors in the plant. One type is called eustress, the other one is called de-stress, eustress and de-stress. Okay, so what is the difference between eustress and de-stress? So let's think these two different situations. If a plant is under severe stress condition, okay, so plant is exposed to a severe stress condition, that means the magnitude is high, the magnitude of the stress condition is high, and also it will be there for a longer period of time. Okay, that is the duration is also high, and also maybe rate, if you can think about a rate, okay, maybe evaporation rate, okay, so that is also high. Okay, so that severe stress can be established by all these three different ways: magnitude, by the exposure time, and also the rate. So if it is very severe, plants will experience a physiological destabilization. So there will be some oxidative damages. So what are the oxidative damages means? The reactive oxygen species will be produced, and they will oxidize lipids in the membrane, and also the DNA and whatever they will encounter. Okay, so that is what we call oxidative damages. Okay, and DNA will be damaged and inactivate the photosynthesis because there are biochemical reactions going on a membrane, and cell death will happen ultimately. Okay, so like within a short period of time, the plant cells and the plant will collapse. Okay, so that type of stresses are called de-stress conditions. Okay, de-stress conditions. Okay, so they are severe stress conditions. And if the plant are exposed to mild stress conditions, okay, because under severe stress conditions, all these things will occur very shortly. Okay, the plants will not have enough time to get adapted to that condition. But if if it is exposed to a mild stress conditions, okay, it is magnitude wise, it is very low. So the plants will have some time to adjust their metabolism to optimize their performance. Okay, so let's think the temperature is increasing gradually. Okay, it's not like happening like within one hour time. Okay, it will take like 1 week to increase the temperature from 25 degrees to 30 degrees centigrade. So plants will have a long period of time, okay, to get adjusted to these new conditions. So they have time to synthesize. So specific genes can be expressed. Okay, so there can be some alterations or some breakdowns in the cell, so they can be repaired. Okay, and also some protection mechanisms, responses can be activated. Okay, so different phytochemicals and antioxidants can be synthesized in the cells, and now they are accumulating, so they can have a protection. They can make a protection against those new conditions or growing conditions, and morphological developmental adjustments can take place. Okay, so these type of stresses can are called eustress conditions. Okay, so if it is a de-stress conditions, what will happen? The cell will go towards the death because there's no time to get recovered. But if it is an eustress condition, then plants have some time to adjust to the new environment or new conditions, and they can tolerate by having these different types of responses. Okay, so they are called eustress conditions. So if it is like eustress condition, like like if it is happening like taking long period of time, the eustress conditions, they lead to what we call acclimation of the plant. Okay, so acclimation, and there's a similar another term called adaptation. But in biology, acclimation and adaptation have two different meanings. So I will explain that those two different meanings later. So this condition, eustress will lead to the what we call acclimation of plants. Okay, acclimation conditions. So acclimation is the process of becoming an individual organism adjusted to the new environmental condition. Keep in mind, it is an individual level thing. Okay, so individual organism will adjust to the new conditions. So why this individual is important? Because if you talk about the adaptation in biology, okay, adaptation is a population thing. I will talk about that. Adaptation is an evolutionary process, but acclimation is not an evolutionary process because that will not go into the DNA level. Okay, so it's just plant level, individual level thing, the process of becoming adjusted to the new condition. Okay, so uh, also it is called hardening. Okay, so the process of acclimation is called hardening of the plant. So this is the time in this graph. You can see this is the type. This is the rate of a physiological process. Okay, let's say take it photosynthesis rate or maybe growth, something. So first the plant is at a homeostatic static state with state A. Okay, so when the plant is growing happily, here you can see the onset of the stress condition. Okay, so this is the onset of the stress condition. So once the onset of the stress condition, there are two things that can. The first thing is when there is a sudden stress condition, the plant, the physiological process will slow down. Okay, so here you can see in the black graph, it is slowing down, and the rate of slowing down can be like decreasing. It's not increasing; it's decreasing. Okay, if it is like not very strong type of stress. So we are talking about mild stress conditions. So even though the new homeostatic stress status is below the original one, the plant will survive, okay, and it can live somewhat happily at at its or at its new homeostatic state. Sometimes, depending on the species and also depending on the stress conditions, okay. So after the drop of the rate of the physiological process, the plants can like adjust, and their new homeostatic state can be little bit above the normal one. So for an example, if you think about like salt tolerance, so we can make some individuals more tolerant to the salt. So original homeostatic state is somewhere below, the new one is somewhere above. Okay, so it will reach to a new homeostatic state, which is like above the initial one, and it will move like this. If the stress condition is continuing, the new status will be maintained. And if the stress is removed, then it can fall back to the original one. Okay, it can fall back to the original one, original homeostatic state. Okay, so this is how the acclimation takes place. Okay, so what are the difference? What is the difference between acclimation and adaptation? Okay, so adaptation is a long-term adjustment shown by living organisms to changing environment. Okay, plant එකක් adapt වෙනවා කියලා කියන එක. Acclimation is a temporary and short-term adjustment shown by living organism to changing environment. One is a long-term process. It will take like hundreds of thousands of generations to adapt to a certain condition. But for acclimation, it is something acquired during its lifetime. Okay, so can somebody explain me the adaptation process according to the evolutionary biology? How you explain the adaptations? How you define the adaptation? What is an adaptation actually? The definition? Define from your words, can you define adaptation? What is an adaptation? How you define an adaptation? Let's take one animal or plant is adapted to this particular certain condition or this environment. Environment adapt for an example, let's take one good example, camouflage. Okay, camouflage is like adaptation to live in a particular environment. So from that example, how you define adaptation? මොකද adaptation එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ?
It's some selection of some good characters having some organism select like they are go for the next generation, and others are
Yes, yeah, it's something related to the natural selection. Okay, so the best fitted organisms will be selected.
And these are the,
yes, yeah. So if you, I got one answer from. So and did somebody answered? No. Okay. So what is an adaptation? So adaptation, what ultimately increase, what will be increased by an adaptation ultimately? So adaptation is a process. It's a process that will increase the survival and reproduction of the species. මොකක් හරි adaptation එකකදී අන්තිමට වෙන්නේ මොකද්ද? ඒකට adapt වුණා කියලා කියන්නේ that means the plant that particular species can survive better in that environment and then they can reproduce better in that environment. So we call that particular species is adapted to that condition. Okay. So acclimatization, that is the word, or acclimation, that is also same, but it is not an evolutionary process. Okay, so within a short period of time, within that life cycle, they acquire those characters. But adaptation, you know that it has to, there should be a allele change. Okay, allele, and also it has to occur in a population, because we know that the unit of evolution is population. So there will be individuals with different characters. Okay, there is a variation, and among this variation, when the environment is changed, only certain characters will get benefit, others will not. So you know the common example, the length of the giraffe's necks. There is a variation. That means there are two type of giraffes. Some have short necks, some have long necks, and some have middle necks, okay, length necks. And then the environment is changing. So that is how we say, okay, the food is getting scared. Okay. So then what will happen? The fittest organisms will get a benefit. So the giraffes with longer necks can reach to the leaves at the top level, and they can eat them. Okay, but others with short neck, they cannot eat them. So what will happen? Only the long neck giraffes can survive, and they get a better chance to reproduce. Therefore, the long neck allele will go in a high percentage, or high percentage to the next generation, because the other short neck giraffes, they cannot reproduce and they cannot survive, they cannot reproduce. Therefore, their allele, the short neck allele, will disappear from the population. Therefore, from generation to generation, if the condition is prevailing, then what will happen? You can see an increment of long neck gene, or that is what we call evolution. So the population of giraffes will be adapted to the new condition. Okay, that is how we explain the evolutionary process. So now you see, to see a big change in a character, it will take like thousands of generations. So that change will not get acquired within 1 or 2 generations. But acclimation, it takes a short period of time. So the second one is time taken, takes a long time to appear, but acclimation, it takes a short time to appear. Okay. So the changes in the adaptation, both physical and chemical composition of the organism can be changed. Only the physical change occur in the organism. Okay, there won't be a biochemical changes or no genetic changes in the organism. So actually how this happens, we call this is due to, the acclimation is due to what we call phenotypic plasticity of an organism. Okay, acclimation is run by phenotypic plasticity. Okay, what is the term phenotypic plasticity? So we know what it is mean by phenotype, we know what it is mean by genotype, and then another word, plasticity. So we know that there are certain genes, those genes are responsible for a certain character. So let's take like tall, there's a tall gene, and capital T, dominant, simple T, that is short. Okay, so that particular gene is responsible only for one character. Okay, so but phenotypic plasticity, if it is phenotypic plasticity, that phenotype in response, some single genotype can generate more than one phenotypes. එකම genotype එක තියෙන්නේ, but depending on the environmental condition, they can have different phenotypes. So because So the if I write it, so for a phenotype or trait, let's say it's a trait. Trait is determined by different characters. One is by genes. There is a genetic component for a phenotype. And also there is an environmental component for the phenotype, environment. And also there is an epigenetic component for a phenotype. There can be some other components, but these are main things. Epigenetic components so for a phenotype. අපිට දකින ලක්ෂණයක, so any phenotype can have this genetic component, environmental component, and epigenetic component. So what is genetic component? So there are certain characters. That character is determined only by the genotype. Okay, no any environmental component can interfere with the phenotype. Okay, so there are certain characters like that. So for an example, if you think about the taxonomy, we rely on the floral characters to divide the plants into different clades and different families, those type of things. Why? Because we say that no matter which environment they live, they grow, the floral characters will not alter. හැමකටම නෙමෙයි ගොඩක් ඒවා වලට floral characters වෙනස් වෙන්නේ නැහැනේ. Because there is no genetic environmental component for that. Only the genes will determine their characters. So they won't get bigger when the nutrients are good. They won't get smaller. Okay, and the color won't change depending on the environment. Okay, so that is why we rely on those characters. So they have only the genetic component. Some characters they have genetic component as well as environmental component. So for an example, let's take our skin color. Skin color is partially determined by the genetics, our genetics, and also if you are exposed to the sunlight for a long period of time, you will become darker. Okay, so because of the environmental component. Okay, and also there is an epigenetic component too. Some characters they have epigenetic component. That means the methylation level. I think all of you are familiar with this epigenetic word. So environmental characters can change the expression pattern of the genes. So what we see actually as a character phenotype is a result of genes, environment, and epigenetics. There are certain others, but these are the main three. Okay, so certain characters they have environmental component is prominent. Okay, environment can play a high role for that. So for an example, let's take some plants. When they are exposed to sunlight, or if they are in the sun facing, their leaves become very broad. If they are in shade, they become small. Okay, there are certain plants, if the nutrients are very low, their root system can grow high. Okay, and if the nutrients are adequate, they have a shallow root system. But depending on the environment, the organ can have different phenotypes. So that is what we call phenotypic plasticity. So acclimation, okay, is done by this phenotypic plasticity because nothing happened to genes, but the phenotype is changed. And plant එක උස යනවද මිටි වෙනවද කියන එක determine කරන්නේ not rather than the genes, the environmental factors. So they can become whether tall or short depending on the environment because the most of the things will be controlled by the environmental factors. Okay. And evolutionary importance, adaptation is part of the evolutionary process, but acclimation does not affect the evolutionary process because there is no genetic level changes. Acclimation එක genes වලට change එක යන්නේ නැති නිසා it will not affect the allele composition. Okay, there is no effect of speed of the process, gradual process adaptation because the increment of the allele composition, allele percentage gradually changes from one generation to another generation, but acclimation is a rapid process within a short period of time. Permanent or temporal, adaptation is a permanent, it cannot go back, but acclimation is a temporal one. Once the conditions become normal again, they will come back to normal. Okay, reversible, irreversible. Adaptation is an irreversible one. Acclimation is a reversible one. That's why it will drop back to the normal condition once the stress is removed. Occurrence, overplays over many generations occur within the lifetime of an individual. Okay, so but both genetic adaptation and phenotypic plasticity both can contribute to the plant's overall tolerance and extremes in their abiotic environment. Okay, so that is the difference between the acclimation and adaptation. For the plants, uh, the actually the species is going on the continuous adaptation process, because we know that all we are evolving every time, every day we are evolving. So we are evolving, but while the species evolving, individual level, some individuals they are acclimatizing to their environmental condition, newly facing environmental conditions. So there is a difference between acclimation and adaptation. Okay, is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, good. So the next one is what happens during the stress condition. So I think it's 4 o'clock. So is there a difference between acclimatization and acclimation? I don't think there's a difference between acclimatization and acclimation. Maybe how they acclimatization. I don't think there's a difference. I'm not 100% sure, but they can be interchangeable. You better to check. I have never checked that. Okay, because I can see the both words the same document, same places. Therefore, I don't think that there's any difference. But I would like to stick to the acclimation, that word. Okay, so you better to check, and I will also check and let you know. Okay, so I'm not going to start this new topic. What happens during the stress? The sequence of phrases. I will stop here. It's 5:04. We did 2 hours of lecture, so I will stop the lecture by now. And if you have any question, you can stay and ask. If you don't have any question, you can leave. Okay, have a good evening.
Thank you, sir.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, sir.
Thank you, sir.